So why do I think shares in Apple are cooked? This is the layer where many analysts were focusing on that Apple could lever to increase revenues. However, we see that units sold peaked in 2021 and weren't much higher than 2015 actually. So you see slowing down of Apple sales from the iPhone. Sold divided by active shows the iPhone replacement cycle. You see it slowing down over time. In fact, it could get even slower. And up to now, AI, Apple Intelligence, the whole hype with that could not manage to make it faster. There is one thing that is growing, though, for Apple, and that is services. Basically, services revenue is what is saving Apple's revenue. This mainly comes from the App Store and cloud. Apple has been quietly making $20 billion a year plus as a payment from Google to basically deliver the Apple ecosystem to Google and their search engine by softly pushing Apple users to use the Google engine instead of another search engine. And this agreement has been the case of an antitrust lawsuit from the DOJ versus Google, and the DOJ decided against Google. So I think eventually this agreement will have to be trashed. So there go $25 billion from Apple's bottom line because of this. But besides the Google deal, we have App Store pressure from Epic and other developers because Apple has been gatekeeping the ecosystem and abusing their power. Basically, one could argue this is a Sherman Act tying arrangement, which is anti-competitive and monopolistic. Apple right now makes 30% on all sales that go through the App Store and 15% on subscriptions. However, Epic Games and other developers decided to go against Apple in a multi-year case. Apple won most points, but Epic won on one important one, and that is that Apple cannot force users to transact through the App Store. It has to allow and enable developers to give buyers a chance to buy outside the App Store. So I think eventually Apple will have to let go of the excessive power they yield over the App Store, because just because you're selling phones and you have billions in an installed base doesn't mean you can do anything with those phones. There are rules, laws, regulations. So Apple is feeling the pressure on all these fronts. The DOJ, Department of Justice, is suing Apple under the Sherman Act for monopolistic practices, for monopolizing the smartphone market. And Apple is by far the biggest smartphone company. But also the EU is cranking up against Apple. So I expect things to happen on that front. And I expect Apple to be affected negatively. Competition. So China has been the only market where Apple actually lost revenue in the 9-month period, year to year. And that's because the Chinese are ramping up competition. In the Western world, it doesn't seem to be any serious competition besides the Android phones, Samsung, etc. Let's have a look at Apple's results. So this is the cash flow statement. Yes, big profits, big money. No major purchases of PP like most other Mac 7 companies, because Apple doesn't really have an AI strategy in terms of infrastructure. You see their major share buyback program. And I note that I am against this because Apple shares are very expensive right now. It's not like it was 10 years ago where they were very cheap. So these repurchases do not accrete to the bottom line in a serious manner. But it's one of the few levers that Apple can pull to increase EPS. Nothing else to see here in the cash flow. However, there are a few points to note in the income statement. So, small revenue increase in the products line, but big revenue increase in the services line. So from 71 to 80.5, almost $9-10 million, 17% almost year-to-year increase, and almost the same cost of sales. All that money drops to the bottom line. That's because of the reasons we just mentioned. So 100 billion in EBIT for the 9 months. Expect 120 to 130 for the year. As I mentioned, China dropping in sales, everything else going up. So 130 to 140 billion in EBIT, approximate earnings power for the company. But is that a static thing? Is that it? No. What is the optionality here? I think the optionality for Apple from here is negative. First, talking about the business, they could lose a lot of those App Store revenues and income. They could lose the Google money every year, and this would affect their bottom line very negatively. So let's say they lose 20 billion from Google and 20 billion from the App Store. 40 billion. Let's just hypothesize here. So they lose 20 billion. Let's just hypothesize that they do lose that money. Leaves them with 100 billion in EBIT. Right now the company is selling for 3 trillion. EV to EBIT of 30 times. So 40 times earnings for a very, very slow grower. So if you normalize for the negative optionality that could unfold for this company, you're looking at 40 times earnings for a company that doesn't really grow in its other segments, that is products, doesn't really grow much in the iPhone, which is by far the biggest. And of course, we have Macs, iPads, which are significant but smaller. Services is what it's carrying the company now that we see the replacement cycle slowing, units sold and revenue going sideways. So what is my conclusion? Apple could have a 40 to 50% downside from here when markets re-rate, when passive starts to go south a little bit, passive flows and a benign investing environment is pushing up companies like this. So I think as a business, Apple should be worth at least 50% lower than where it is now. There is no massive positive optionality. The risks are to the downside. They don't have any crazy organic innovations in the pipeline that could transform their business. They are banking on the iPhone and the Mac on the product side and services like the cloud and App Store. What do you expect to make from this? Ask yourself this question.